Reckoning at Dusty Ridge. The sun beat down on Dusty Ridge, baking the parched earth and the weathered faces of its inhabitants. Martha Hayes squinted at the horizon, her calloused hands gripping the worn wooden porch railing. The Hayes Ranch, her husband's legacy and her lifeblood, was all she had left. Dusty Ridge was a hard place, but it was her hard place. A cloud of dust billowed in the distance, growing larger, closer. Martha knew that dust cloud. It belonged to Silas Granger, a man whose greed was as vast as the arid landscape surrounding them. Granger, with his slick-back hair and eyes like polished obsidian, wanted her land. He wanted all their land. Granger's arrival was heralded by the rumble of his black Cadillac and the swagger of his hired guns, lean men with hard eyes and even harder reputations. He stepped out, a sneer twisting his lips. "Martha Hayes," he drawled, his voice oily smooth, "time to face facts. This land's going to be mine." Martha stood her ground. "Over my dead body, Granger." Granger chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down Lila's spine. Lila, Martha's spirited daughter, watched from the porch, her fists clenched. She'd inherited her mother's stubbornness, but also a burning desire to protect what was theirs. Jake Thompson, a retired lawman, watched the confrontation from the saloon's dusty window. He'd seen enough of Granger's kind in his time. He'd also seen enough failure, enough injustice to last a lifetime. He'd hung up his gun, seeking solace in the quiet anonymity of Dusty Ridge. But something about Martha's defiant stance, and the fear in Lila's eyes, stirred something within him. Granger's men advanced, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon sun. Martha stood firm, but fear flickered in her eyes. Lila, impulsive as ever, ran towards her mother, a small figure facing a looming threat. Jake Thompson sighed. He'd tried to bury the lawman inside him, but some things just wouldn't stay buried. He pushed open the saloon doors and stepped into the street. "Granger," he said, his voice surprisingly strong, "this isn't the way things are done in Dusty Ridge." Granger's obsidian eyes flicked to Jake. "Thompson, I heard you'd crawled off to die in the dust. Looks like you've still got some fight left in you." "Enough to see justice done," Jake replied, his hand instinctively hovering near where his gun belt used to be. The initial confrontation was a stalemate. Granger, realizing he wouldn't get his way easily, retreated, but the tension hung heavy in the air. That night, Martha sought out Jake. "We need your help," she pleaded. "Granger won't stop. He'll take everything." Jake hesitated. His past failures haunted him. But looking at Martha's desperate face, and the spark of defiance in Lila's eyes, he knew he couldn't turn away. Lila, impatient with the adult's cautious approach, took matters into her own hands. She rallied the younger ranchers, those who still had the fire in their bellies, and began to organize. She even sought out Jake, eager to learn anything he could teach her about self-defense and the law. A bond formed between them, the grizzled lawman and the fiery young woman, each teaching the other something about courage and hope. The townsfolk, inspired by Martha's resilience and Lila's enthusiasm, began to unite against Granger. They were farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers, ordinary people facing an extraordinary threat. The climax arrived like a desert storm. Granger and his men rode into Dusty Ridge, expecting an easy victory. But they were met with a united front. The townsfolk, armed with pitchforks, rusty rifles, and a fierce determination, stood their ground. Just as the violence was about to erupt, Lila stepped forward. She held up a document, a land deed Granger had forged, proving his claim to the land was fraudulent. The revelation stunned Granger's men, sowing discord in their ranks. The fight that followed was short and brutal. Granger's men, demoralized and exposed, were quickly outmatched. Granger himself tried to escape, but Jake, his old instincts kicking in, stopped him. With Granger's arrest, the threat to Dusty Ridge was finally over. The town celebrated, the sound of laughter echoing through the dusty streets for the first time in a long time. Jake, his faith in justice restored, decided to stay in Dusty Ridge. He'd found a new purpose, a new beginning. Lila, no longer a girl but a young woman, stood beside him, her eyes shining with confidence. Martha watched them, a quiet smile on her lips. Dusty Ridge was still a hard place, but it was their hard place. And they'd faced it together. The reckoning had come, and justice, however delayed, had finally prevailed. The dust settled on Dusty Ridge, leaving behind a sense of hard-won peace. The scars of Granger's reign were still visible, a broken window here, a boarded-up store there, but the spirit of the town had been rekindled. Martha's ranch, once threatened, now stood as a symbol of resilience, its weathered walls echoing with the laughter of family and friends. Jake, no longer haunted by the ghosts of his past, had taken on the role of town marshal. He wasn't the fastest drawer in the West, but he was fair, and he was just, qualities Dusty Ridge had sorely lacked. He'd set up an office in the old general store, the scent of leather and old paper replacing the lingering aroma of stale whiskey. Lila, now a young woman with a quiet strength, worked alongside her mother on the ranch. She discovered a knack for negotiation, her sharp mind and persuasive tongue proving invaluable in dealing with neighboring ranchers and suppliers. She also kept a close eye on local politics, determined to ensure no one like Granger ever gained a foothold in Dusty Ridge again. One crisp autumn evening, a stranger rode into town. He was a tall, lean man with a dusty Stetson and eyes that seemed to absorb the light. He introduced himself as Caleb Stone, a surveyor, and claimed he was looking for land to purchase. Caleb was polite, even charming, but something about him made Jake uneasy. His questions about land ownership and water rights seemed a little too pointed, a little too keen. Jake's lawman instincts, honed over years of experience, whispered that something wasn't right. Lila, ever observant, noticed the way Caleb's gaze lingered on Martha's ranch, the subtle calculations in his eyes. She shared her concerns with Jake. "He's not just a surveyor, Jake. I can feel it." Jake nodded. "I agree. We need to find out what he's really after." They began to discreetly investigate Caleb. Jake checked land records in the county seat, while Lila used her network of contacts to gather information. What they discovered was disturbing. Caleb Stone wasn't his real name. He was a land speculator, working for a powerful railroad company with a reputation for ruthless tactics. They wanted the land around Dusty Ridge, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get it. The railroad's plan was to build a new line through the area, which would bring prosperity to some, but would also displace many ranchers and farmers who had called this land home for generations. They'd sent Caleb ahead to pave the way, to buy up land at bargain prices, using deception and manipulation. Martha, remembering the hard-won battle against Granger, refused to back down. "They'll have to go through me," she declared, her voice firm. "This land isn't just dirt and rocks, it's our heritage. It's our home." Lila, inspired by her mother's courage, devised a plan. She knew the railroad needed access to water, and the only reliable water source in the region was on the Hayes Ranch. She proposed they offer the railroad a limited easement, allowing them access to the water, but only on their terms. The negotiations were tense. Caleb, now revealed as a wolf in sheep's clothing, tried to bully them, threatening legal action and hinting at the railroad's vast resources. But Lila stood her ground, her voice ringing with conviction. She argued that the community of Dusty Ridge was willing to work with the railroad, but not at the cost of their livelihoods and their homes. Jake, backing Lila's play, reminded Caleb that any underhanded dealings would be met with the full force of the law. He'd made some powerful friends in his time, friends who wouldn't take kindly to the railroad's strong-arm tactics. Finally, the railroad relented. They agreed to Lila's terms, granting the community fair compensation for the easement and guaranteeing that no one would be forced off their land. Dusty Ridge had faced another challenge, and once again, they'd emerged victorious. The railroad came, bringing with it both benefits and disruptions, but the community, united and strong, adapted and thrived. As the sun set over Dusty Ridge, casting long shadows across the land, Martha, Jake, and Lila stood together on the porch of the Hayes Ranch. They'd learned that the fight for justice was never truly over. There would always be new challenges, new threats. But they'd also learned that together, they could face anything. The spirit of Dusty Ridge, forged in hardship and tempered by courage, would endure. Years passed, etching lines of wisdom on Martha's face and silver streaks in Jake's hair. Lila, now a woman in her own right, had married a neighboring rancher, a kind and hard-working man named Samuel. They had 2 children, a boy named Ethan and a girl named Sarah, who brought a renewed vibrancy to the Hayes Ranch. Dusty Ridge had grown, albeit slowly. The railroad had brought some changes, a few new businesses, and a steady trickle of travelers passing through. But the town had managed to retain its character, its sense of community. The spirit of resilience, forged in the fires of adversity, still burned bright. One sweltering summer, a drought gripped the land. The creeks dried up, the crops withered, and a pall of despair settled over Dusty Ridge. Ranchers, already struggling, faced ruin. Old tensions, dormant for years, began to resurface as people fought over dwindling resources. Martha, remembering the unity that had saved them in the past, tried to rally the community. "We've faced hard times before," she reminded them. "We can get through this, but only if we work together." But fear and desperation were powerful forces. Accusations flew, old grudges resurfaced, and the fragile bonds of community began to fray. Even Lila and Samuel found themselves arguing over water rights, the strain of the drought testing their relationship. Jake, weary but resolute, tried to mediate, to reason with people. But he found his words falling on deaf ears. The drought had unleashed a primal fear, a desperate scramble for survival that threatened to tear Dusty Ridge apart. Ethan, Lila's bright and observant son, watched the growing discord with a troubled heart. He remembered the stories of how his grandmother and Jake had saved the town from Granger and the railroad. He couldn't understand why everyone was fighting now, when they needed each other more than ever. One evening, Ethan, unable to bear the tension any longer, slipped away from the ranch. He rode his pony to the highest point overlooking Dusty Ridge, the place where he often went to think. From there, he could see the parched land, the empty creek beds, and the worried faces of the townspeople. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dry landscape, Ethan had an idea. He remembered an old story his grandfather had told him, a legend about a hidden spring, a source of water that never ran dry. It was just a story, a myth, but Ethan clung to it, a flicker of hope in the face of despair. He rode back to the ranch, his heart pounding with excitement. He told his family about the legend, about the hidden spring. At first, they were skeptical, dismissing it as a childish fantasy. But Ethan's earnestness, his unwavering belief, touched something within them. Lila, remembering her own youthful impulsiveness, decided to investigate. She and Samuel, putting aside their differences, joined Ethan on a search for the legendary spring. They followed old trails, consulted with the few remaining Native Americans in the area, and studied ancient maps. After days of searching, they finally found it. Hidden deep within a rocky canyon, a small spring bubbled up from the earth, a lifeline in the parched landscape. It wasn't a large spring, but it was enough to sustain the town until the rains returned. News of the spring spread through Dusty Ridge like wildfire. The fear and desperation that had gripped the town began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of hope. People came together, working to channel the water to their fields and their homes. The drought eventually broke, the rains returned, and Dusty Ridge was saved, not just by a hidden spring, but by the rediscovery of their shared spirit, their ability to overcome adversity through unity and hope. Ethan, the young boy who had believed in a legend, had become a symbol of their resilience. As the town celebrated, Martha, Jake, Lila, and Samuel stood together, watching the children play. They knew that Dusty Ridge would face other challenges in the years to come. But they also knew that the spirit of the town, the spirit of community, would endure. They had learned that the true strength of Dusty Ridge wasn't in its land or its resources, but in the bonds that connected its people, bonds forged in hardship, tempered by courage, and renewed by hope. The years continued their relentless march, painting the landscape of Dusty Ridge with the hues of changing seasons. Martha, her body weary but her spirit undimmed, watched her grandchildren grow, their laughter echoing through the rooms of the old ranch house. Jake, his steps slower but his gaze still sharp, remained a steadfast presence in the town, a symbol of justice and quiet strength. Lila, now a matriarch herself, guided her family and the community with the same fiery determination she had shown as a young woman. Ethan, the boy who had found the hidden spring, grew into a thoughtful and resourceful young man. He inherited his grandmother's love for the land and his mother's sharp mind. He left Dusty Ridge for a time, attending agricultural college, learning new techniques and sustainable farming practices. He returned, bringing with him new ideas and a renewed commitment to preserving the fragile ecosystem of the region. Sarah, Ethan's sister, inherited her grandfather's quiet strength and her mother's compassion. She became a teacher, dedicating her life to educating the children of Dusty Ridge, nurturing their minds and instilling in them the values of community and resilience. Dusty Ridge, though still small, had thrived. The railroad, while initially a source of concern, had ultimately brought some benefits, connecting the town to the wider world and opening up new opportunities. The community had learned to adapt, embracing progress while preserving their unique character. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves turned gold and red, a sense of melancholy settled over Dusty Ridge. Martha, her strength finally failing, passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her family. Her loss was deeply felt, a void left in the heart of the community. But her legacy lived on, woven into the fabric of Dusty Ridge, a testament to her courage, her resilience, and her unwavering belief in the power of community. A few years later, Jake, his long life finally catching up with him, joined Martha in the great beyond. His passing was mourned by all, a reminder of the quiet heroism that had shaped the town. He was remembered not just as a lawman, but as a friend, a mentor, and a symbol of unwavering integrity. Lila, now the elder stateswoman of Dusty Ridge, carried the torch, her spirit as vibrant as ever. She watched her children and grandchildren carry on the traditions of the town, their lives intertwined with the land and the community. One warm summer day, Lila sat on the porch of the Hayes Ranch, watching Ethan and Sarah's children play in the yard. The sun beat down on the parched earth, but the creek, fed by the hidden spring, still flowed, a lifeline in the arid landscape. She looked out at the familiar vista, the rolling hills, the distant mountains, the vast expanse of sky. Dusty Ridge had changed over the years, but its heart, its spirit, remained the same. It was a place where people knew their neighbors, where they helped each other through hard times, where they celebrated each other's successes. Lila smiled, a deep and contented smile. She had witnessed the best and the worst of Dusty Ridge, the challenges and the triumphs, the losses and the joys. She had seen the community tested, broken, and rebuilt, stronger than before. She knew that Dusty Ridge would continue to face challenges. Droughts, storms, and new threats would come. But she also knew that the spirit of the town, the spirit of community, would endure. Because that spirit, forged in the fires of adversity, tempered by courage, and renewed by hope, was the true strength of Dusty Ridge. And it was a strength that would never fade. The legacy of Martha, Jake, and all those who had come before would live on, carried in the hearts of the people who called Dusty Ridge home. The story of Dusty Ridge, a story of resilience, community, and the enduring power of the human spirit, would continue to be written, generation after generation, in the dust and the dreams of this small, but remarkable, town. Embark on the ultimate adventure with the Western Echoes, Cowboy Tales Unleashed. Immerse yourself in the thrill of our riveting cowboy stories and unforgettable tales. Don't just listen from the sidelines, be part of the journey. Smash that subscribe button now to guarantee you never miss a single post. The frontier awaits, saddle up and ride with us today.